Jeannie. Okay, everyone, welcome to Senate Education. It is Tuesday, May 11th, 1:23 in the afternoon. Senators, we have S16 on our calendar for a vote. We've had this around. You'll recall that Mr. Dan Murray has taken us through it, and I know I believe everyone's had ample time. We also are hoping senators have had ample time to review it. We also heard from Mr. Diaz, who took us through, he was one of our partners on this bill and also spent some time with us. So I would welcome a motion to concur, or if senators would prefer, we can always postpone. So, but I think we're at a good spot right now. So,
move to concur.
Okay, Senator Hooker moves to concur with House further proposal of amendment on S16 as passed by the House. Questions or discussion? Seeing none. Senator Perchlik, would you call the roll? If that's necessary. I think we.
Yeah, I couldn't remember.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Senator Perchlik votes yes. Senator Lyons?
Yes.
Senator Terenzini?
Yes.
Senator Hooker?
Yes.
Senator Shipman?
Aye.
Forgot about that. Senator Campion?
Yes. So Senator Hooker at 600. Do you mind? You're going to say a few things on the floor tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And I should send this up to the secretary.
Yes. Please send it to the secretary and yeah. Senator Terenzini, did you have your hand up?
Thank you.
No. Okay.
No.
Senator Perchlik. No. Okay. Okay. Thank you. S115, Tucker Anderson. This is, senators will recall that 115 is our miscellaneous education bill. The House added a number of things. We have a side-by-side that was given to us by Mr. Desmarais. And now we could not go through the library section since that was drafted by Mr. Anderson on and not by Mr. Desmarais. So with that, I'm looking to see if we have Mr. Anderson with us.
I've emailed him. He should be on his way.
Okay. If he's not here in just a minute, we'll continue with we'll get started with Ms. Simmons. But if we could just give him another minute. Ms. Simmons, do you want to kick us off? Oh, here he is. Just. Mr. Anderson, we are awaiting your, there you are, perfect. So we are looking at S-115. You had drafted the sections regarding the library studies. I think that was all of your work on this bill. We have a side-by-side and wondering if you would give us any comments that the House made or any changes.
Good afternoon, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. The House made 2 changes that I think the committee discussed while it was in the Senate, and that is that they deleted sections 3 and 5. And these were sections that overlapped with H337 as it passed the House. And H337, to refresh your recollection, is the bill that dealt with the distribution of state publications. And that is up for consideration on the Senate floor tomorrow. So the bills were not harmonized. Some of the changes that were made in S-115 did not accurately reflect let's say the will of the Department of Libraries or the General Assembly as a whole. But H337 had more modernized provisions in it. So the House committee decided to take out sections 3 and 5 from this bill in favor of those that are in H337.
So what are the differences?
Primarily technical differences. So there's more language struck to bring you back to what was in sections 3 and 5, largely dealt with outdated duties of the Department of Library to print and distribute certain state publications or to keep certain federal, state, and local documents within the Department of Libraries, and to correct some references to what was formerly known as the Bailey Howe Library at the University of Vermont. So H337 had more technical corrections than the bill that you had in front of you.
So to be accurate, the language traveled in the bill. Our 2 sections are now in 337, but with some technical changes.
Yes.
Purely technical, no real policy difference from our intention.
I would say yes, with one notable difference, which is that the S-115 did not strike the duty of the Department of Libraries to maintain records of local ordinances and laws, but H337 does. So if that is a critical policy choice for the Department of Libraries, then that's the one big substantive difference that I would highlight.
So I'm sorry, so I just have to make sure I'm clear on this. So we had instructed the department to actually maintain those records?
Someone in the past had instructed the department to maintain those records. Your bill did not strike that duty. H337 does.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Anderson? I will touch base with the Department of Libraries. Mr. Anderson, do you remember who the Department of Libraries person is?
There are 2, the state librarian, Jason Broughton, and then the assistant state librarian, Tom McMurdo.
Okay, let me start with Jason. Terrific. Great. Any questions for Mr. Anderson? We'll check in again with Mr. Broughton on that to make sure that they're comfortable, but okay, great. Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Simmons, S-115. We have been through the side-by-side. We know, the House's intentions. I suspect that you were involved, as well as your agency, in these changes. If you would just let us know or direct us to the parts that are most important to you at this point, and that you would like to comment on, and let us know your thoughts. We'd appreciate it.
Thank you. For the record, Emily Simmons. Agency of Education General Counsel. We were involved with sections 9, 10, 12, and 13. And I can be as brief as can be to say that we were supportive of the changes that were made over on the other side in the House in those sections and testified to that effect. So I can prompt your memory of those
Yeah,
sections.
that would be great. So if you would just tell us what those sections are, and if you had particular changes that you recommended, we're not going to let you off the hook quite that easily.
So section 9 relates to the wellness program that exists already in Title 16 and made what I would say some clarifying changes that the Committee on Education over in the House wanted to see and asked the agency our opinion. And we said, yes, all of those changes that you see highlighted in yellow in the side-by-side would work for us, or we could work with those changes. So they related to a little bit to the membership of who serves on that council and to the policies that are required, school districts are required to adopt related to wellness. Then easy enough in section 10, adding the School Boards Association makes sense to us because that is the entity that traditionally distributes policies to school districts.
And did you mention section 11 also?
When we worked with the House Committee, my memory is that we weren't involved or didn't give testimony on section 11. That was, if you're wondering who was school counselors, the Principals Association, I was in the room when the Principals Association gave some testimony on section 11, but the agency did not.
Okay.
So section 12 we were involved with. This relates to the some changes requested by the Ethnic and Social Equity Standards Advisory Working Group. I know you're going to hear from Amanda Garces on these as well. The agency was supportive of expanding to include, expanding that group, to include additional high school students and a member of Vermont's Indigenous community. And then we really worked closely with the committee to get the right mechanism for potentially contracting for a contractor who would work with the working group, a consultant, to provide some additional technical assistance. But the agency's testimony was a little nuanced. We said, please ask the Agency of Education first. Please give us a chance to tell you whether we have that resource, whatever it's going to be. And if not, then we will work to get the resource through contract for the working group. And there's an appropriation here that we think is appropriate, $50,000 for that work if it's needed. That's all. Section 14 relates to the school district data management system, and our CFO, Bill Bates, is here to talk about that, which is section 14 and 15 and 16. And in section 17, which means that my last section that I can talk about is section 18, which is a State Board of Education and Agency of Education report. That should take you through the end of the bill, except for the effective dates.
And we'd like to hear about that section, but before we do so, Senator Chittenden.
Did you skip over Senator 13? And that's a section that you did not weigh in on? The $50,000.
13, I accidentally lumped together with section 12. So 13, we support that sum of $50,000 if needed for the cost of the contractor who will be the consultant to the working group. And the $3,700 is the additional per diem for some new members being added to that group.
All right, would you say a few words then about the last section having to do with what the State Board and the Agency of Education are planning to do on this part?
Sure. So we're going to be happy to provide this report. We testified in support of including these sections. We think that the timeline is doable, and I know that Chair Carroll is available today too to provide his support for these sections. We're happy to see him.
Okay, so what do they tell me? Remind us what these sections do. What are we asking you to come back with, etc.
By the end of the year, specifically December 15th, we'll come back to the House and Senate Committees on Education jointly, the State Board and the agency, to give you a report on the roles and responsibilities of the State Board and the agency and how they could be or should be restructured to ensure several goals. 4 goals written by the House Committee, which we fully support. They relate to equity, professional and timely work, including or specific to rules, meeting federal and state statutory mandates, that both entities have the appropriate resources to do their work, and that we maximize operational and administrative efficiencies. So our report is to address those 4 goals. We are directed to specifically document statutory mandates that each are responsible for carrying out and address whether those are being carried out professionally. And there's a provision, if we do not agree, how we are to identify the areas of agreement and disagreement within the report. And we are told not to include any legislative language. The House Committee wanted to be clear that the General Assembly and your staff would address legislative language.
So this is something, just for clarification, you and the State Board could do on your own in a way, but this is just kind of firming it up and putting in statute that we'll receive a report by the 15th of December on this. Okay, and this is work that I know we've heard along the way that you've all been wanting to do and meaning to do for some time now. So, okay. Very good. Anything for Ms. Simmons? Okay, I don't know, can you stay with us, Ms.
Sure.
Simmons, or you can? Okay, great, great. Thanks so much. Mr. Bates. Welcome to Senate Education. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. I do owe you an apology. I did see your email and I'm sorry I wasn't able to connect with you prior to this. The short of it is there are sections here having to do with e-financing that we're particularly interested in hearing a little bit more about them, why the agency, I believe, is supporting them. And any background information you might give us on what they do and why they're important. So with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me, Bill Bates, CFO, Agency of Education. And today I'm joined by Sean Cousineau. Sean has been with the agency for a number of years, and he's been on this project since its inception. So if it's okay with you, I'll turn it over to Sean and he can provide you some high-level background for the first couple of years of the project. And then I'll take it over from there and talk about the past 12 months.
Great, thank you.
Sean?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I'm Sean Cousineau from the Agency of Education. So it's been 3 or 4 years since we started this project. I'll go a little farther back maybe and hit the high points. We worked with a contractor to do some fact finding for what our districts needed for a finance system. And we met with different business managers around the state with the various different finance systems they used. And what came out of that was a list of requirements that people needed or districts needed to do their business. So we worked with our core group of business managers to look through the requirements to make sure we had everything that was necessary for them. And after that, the contractor gave us a kind of a report that gave us a few options on what we should do, and whether we do a shared system like we ended up doing, if we approved a couple systems, or we didn't make any change. And, with support of the business managers, we went ahead with a shared system. So we prepared an RFP. Again, we used those core business managers to prepare it, and also the contractor, Barry Dunn in this case. And we prepared an RFP, and that went out to bid in October of 2017. And then we got all the proposals in, and we asked those same business managers back to help us score, see the demos and score the bids. So we had about 5 business managers who were able to participate. We had 4 or so agency of education staff and 3 or 4 agency of digital service staff. They all watched, looked at the proposals, scored them, reviewed the demos and scored them. And then I think it was in March of 2018, we awarded the contract to Power School with their e-finance product. Let's see. And then, since that was awarded, we've had groups of supervisory unions implement the product. And, as more and more have implemented, we continue to collect feedback from them for enhancements that they feel are required in the system to make it usable for Vermont. And we've been going through getting their top priority enhancements in place. We worked with Power School to get these enhancements on their roadmap for eFinance Plus. And many of the things that we're talking about today, and they're in the language, they've been in the works for a while and are coming to fruition now. So I think that's a high level.
So if I may, so this is, and I'm sorry if I've missed this. So this was something that was started a little while ago, perhaps was it the last legislative session when Senate Ed worked on this?
I think it was, 2 years ago.
About 2 years ago, okay.
At that point, they made it mandatory. That's a step in between. So it wasn't mandatory for all districts when we signed the contract, but I think that next session, I think this committee drove that language in.
And what was and again, I apologize, I stepped out for just a second. What's the benefit or why, just remind me why we're doing this, why we're moving in this direction? And Sean, please tell me, how do you pronounce your last name again? Cousineau?
Cousineau. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So, there's quite a few reasons we're trying to get a statewide system. And I'll share first the reasons for our agency. And, some of those will also benefit the districts. So, we're looking for the ability to, get access to the district expenditure and revenue data quicker and easier. And we've we already have that ability now with the users that are on eFinance. We have an operational data store, ODS data warehouse, where we can pull their information needed, and to assist them when they're submitting data to us. So we have two big collections that we're already doing this for. Our stat book yearly expense revenue collection. We pull the expense and revenues for that information. They still provide us some supplemental data through a different web form. And then we pull their teacher staff information for our yearly teacher staff collection. And then, we're also looking to overall, save some funding, some money for the Ed Fund. When we initially looked at this, our survey had about a little over $2 million being spent on systems throughout the 60 or so supervised unions that we used to have. We're down to 51 or so now, but so when this is all implemented, our yearly maintenance is below 800,000 yearly. So there is a higher cost now that we're implementing, as while we get the entire state on the system. Let's see. And then the uniform chart of accounts. You've probably heard of that. That's another project we've been working on. And as people move on this system, the system has the uniform chart built into it. So they'll build their chart of accounts in the UCOA. And so we'll get more standardized data from everyone on the same chart of accounts. In the past, or for anyone not on the system, yearly they'll have to pull their data out of their current system they use. They'll have to compile it and crosswalk it to our chart. And for some of them, that would take a couple of weeks of effort to get that work done and send us the data. So that's a big win for the districts. If they're on eFinance, we just take their data when we initially, and if they make adjustments due to audits, we can just pull it again within just a few minutes. It's pretty remarkable how quickly that part of the system works for us.
So this is all about efficiencies and collecting data and streamlining things. And there's a pause here in order to give districts
chance.
More time. Senator Hooker, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Campion, and thank you, Mr. Cousineau. Can you just tell us some of the feedback you've gotten from the districts that have implemented this? I know I've heard from districts that are concerned about it, and maybe you could talk about some of the concerns that were brought up and how they're being addressed.
Sure. Yeah. We have a wide variety of concerns, and we find that depending on the system they are coming from, they some coming from some systems feel they're losing some functionality, and that's part of what we'll work with PowerSchool to give that functionality back. Other SU offices that are coming from different systems, they don't seem as much issue with the new software, and they can get their work done without much trouble. We do see where some are spending more time doing the day-to-day work, and that's a big concern for us, because we don't want the state software to add work. So we part of the pause was to provide some more advanced training to hopefully offset some of that additional work. And as the districts are on the system longer, and with this advanced training, we're hoping to lessen the additional work. Some more issues we've heard loud and clear are the reporting. Some districts, or probably all districts, are just have a hard time pulling the necessary data out that they need to do, just to look at their data, to provide information to their boards. And that's another part of the reason we're pausing, to give Power School and our business managers a chance to work together to look at the high priority reports that they need the system to produce in a readable, fashion for their boards and other users of the data. So that's well underway as well.
Hey, Sean, it's Bill.
Sure. Yeah.
And if I can just chime in, the other thing that came to light was last summer when we reached out to some of the audit firms that were doing the audits using eFinance Plus, and we did that. And I think it's helpful for the committee members to understand that I worked in public accounting. I worked at Sullivan Powers and Company for 6 years, and so I used to do the audits of many of the municipalities and school districts in the state of Vermont. And so last summer, I reached out to a number of the audit firms that were doing the work, and also talking to the business managers. And as Sean has mentioned about the reporting and the training, we also highlighted that we needed to have an enhancement with the bank reconciliation functionality as well as do to, do from. And so, being new to the state government, I went and leveraged my private sector experience and spoke to Secretary French and recommended that we do a project pause for 6 months to give the vendor an opportunity to work through these items. And it was then that I found out that with state government, you have to have an oversight review done by the Enterprise Project Management Office. They confirmed what Sean and I have mentioned today. And so we then brought that forth as a recommendation that we delay the project 6 months on the back end so that we could give the vendor 6 months on the front end of that pause to work through these issues. And we're holding them to a tight timeline. So we're telling the vendor that they've got until 6:30 to resolve these issues, and we're tracking them on a regular basis. And Sean, actually, you promoted the idea recently of doing daily stand-ups so that we're getting status updates on a daily basis from not only the vendor, but also the business managers with this major upgrade to 2011.
Great. Thank you both very much. It's great testimony and very helpful in letting us, in painting a picture of what's happening out there. Committee, additional questions for either Mr. Cousineau or Mr. Bates? Okay. Mr. Bates, did you want to add something?
I'm happy to go into as much detail as the committee members might like.
So just again, we're talking about a pause. We're talking about giving business managers and others more time. Senator Chittenden.
So I believe I have to report on this. This makes perfect sense to me, and I fully support it. If since I'm new, may I ask, if we don't pass this, what would happen? Just if I were to get that question, absent this action, what would that impose, and what is the problem with this not being included in S-115 in concurrence with the House?
Yeah, I'll take that. So if you don't include it or don't pass this part of the bill, our deadline stays at July 1 of 22 to get everybody in the state on eFinance. And if I look at my numbers here, so we've got 19 on the system now. We have 2 more going live July 1, and that leaves 30 more SUs and 3 independent tech centers that we would need to get in on the system by July 1 of 22. It's about a nine month implementation process that we have to do ahead of time at the due date. So we'd have to get right back at getting people into the system if you don't give us 6 more months. By passing the bill, you allow us more time to work with the vendor to get some things straightened out to make districts more comfortable implementing. So that's the biggest point from my point of view.
Thanks.
Sure.
Yep.
Mr. Bates, did you want to add anything else or feel it's pretty covered?
I think Sean covered that. My real big concern, having worked in the private sector, is that I'm hearing business managers talk about making and having to do workarounds, and that's unacceptable to me. And so I've made that loud and clear to the vendor that we need to resolve these issues that we've identified, and we'll hold them accountable and make sure that they are doing exactly what we asked them to do. One thing that Sean and I have done also, just for background information, pre-COVID, we joined SNUG, which is the national user group for this product. Unfortunately, COVID hit and they canceled the national user conference last year, but they have just announced that it's coming back this year in October. And so we plan to partner with our business managers to get a team sent from Vermont to participate in that. And then another thing that Sean has been doing recently is reaching out to other e-finance users outside the state of Vermont. So we all know that we only have about 18 to 24 months of experience on this product. So we're reaching out to folks. We have a call actually this Friday with a business manager in Maryland who has been on the system for many, many years, so that we can learn from their experiences in implementing the system and how they've made it work, so that we can leverage those and promote those as best practices here in Vermont.
That's great. Terrific. Great. Committee, any other questions or comments for either of our witnesses at this point? Okay, gentlemen, great testimony. Thanks again for taking us through where we're at, and of course you're welcome to stick around. If we do have additional questions, we also know how to find you both. So again, really very much appreciate the two of you coming in to help us with this section, since this is one of the biggest changes the House proposed amendment makes. Great.
Well, thank you very much for having us, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. Happy
Great.
to help.
Will do. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, how are you?
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good, thanks. We're, as you know, looking at S115. Your team has been very helpful in going through and identifying the changes and why they suggested certain changes and why they support certain changes. So it'd also be great to hear from you. Suspect you overall were involved with some of these changes, and so any information you would like to share on any and all would be most appreciated. So with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you. For the record, Dan French, Secretary of Education, and I believe you know our General Counsel, Emily Simmons, who's with me as well. And
Mr. Secretary, just so you know, we did hear from Ms. Simmons in the beginning. She, again, just took us through the suggestions, but delighted she's still with us. And so if anything else pops up, but know that she gave us a bit of an overview.
Yeah, there's really nothing in the bill now that causes me concern. The only thing I caught, I reread it this morning, just caught my eye from a practitioner standpoint, and that's Section 8, use of funds for education on the limited English proficiency. And the disclaimer and what I guess is new section G, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in the section or otherwise in the law, school district and town or city municipalities may jointly fund the services or one or more cultural liaisons. So that idea of jointly funding issues, is something in practice that, through Act 68 in particular, that we still have to enforce a sort of division, if you will. But there are certainly ways municipalities and school districts can sort of jointly put together a funding scheme. I won't call it a scheme, a contracting approach. But I think the disclaimer is there, but that's the only thing that caught my eye, that we do have to keep the funding pieces separate to a certain extent. But I'd be happy to answer any other questions or.
Committee, while we have, Secretary French here, any questions for either Secretary or additional questions for Ms. Simmons? We are, as you know, Mr. Secretary, we added a radon testing requirement in another bill where it seemed to be a good spot, the school construction bill. We don't know what the House is going to do, but in conversations with leadership, it might be, depending on their actions, we may attach a radon test possibly requirement to this. So maybe while you're here, we could get your response. And just so you know, this committee felt as though it, as you may already know, felt there's a moral obligation to move this forward, that given what radon can cause to developing lungs in young children, we should at the very least be notifying faculty, staff, administration, children, and their families of a school that might not be as healthy as it could be. So any response to our adding that here?
I'll just speak to the general language. I did testify this morning, coincidentally, on H426, which is the school facilities, where I think the language is now. And I believe you're aware, we did ask the U.S. Department of Education for a sort of an opinion on this, quote unquote, opinion, quote unquote, as much as they're inclined to give us an opinion, relative to ESSER funds being utilized. So their response was, I would qualify it as being ambiguous.
Mhm.
Of course, I wouldn't expect much less in that they're not familiar with the specificity in which this is being contemplated. So I think it is, as you're aware, their cautionary note, firstly, on is this a permissible use of ESSER funds? That's open, I believe, at best. So there needs to be an emphatic connection with COVID. My understanding of radon, there possibly is a way to do that through indoor air quality, as sort of being the common issue between COVID and other issues in schools. And my other observation is just in the context of everything else going on, and that's been the theme of much of my testimony in the last couple of weeks, if not last couple of months, as sort of being the emergency manager, if you will, of our COVID response in education. So I certainly support the idea of testing for radon in schools. And I support a lengthy list of other moral imperatives to improve the quality of our schools. The question is how to prioritize that and how to fit it into a context. So I am concerned about, it was similar remarks I made on the lead testing last year, how to fit this in a prioritization, of where everything else is. And districts are, on the one hand, going to be pressed for capacity to do the planning around the recovery piece. We're already hearing from districts in that regard. It's a big undertaking. It's a multi-year undertaking. On the other hand, there's a significant opportunity for them to leverage this ESSER funds, and particularly to improve the quality of facilities for many areas related to the COVID response. So I would just really want this initiative to be viewed in that context of the COVID response, not as a separate standalone policy issue, if you will, and to focus on what's doable at this point, because we are asking schools to do quite a bit, as always. And this needs to be situated in a sort of an overall scope and project plan for improving facilities, not just an add-on.
All right. So I to I want to be respectful of the committee's decision, and the Senate was unanimous. I'd say it's a little bit more than just an add-on. I'd say it, in a way, that description, I don't think adequately describes the, with all due respect, the seriousness of it. I would also say that given the situation of the federal government with possible infrastructure, given that we are facing possibly serious inflation, given the face we're possibly facing lawsuits if someone ever were to become ill, I would say that the timing in some ways couldn't be better. And I personally just worry about, kicking the can down the road on this one. I realize there are many, many things that we are working to address to make sure that our schools are as healthy as possible, and feel as though we've taken some steps on lead, now PCBs with the funding in the budget. And I think this is the next one. So I certainly would like to have the agency's support. And I guess that's what I'm hoping to hear today, to be honest, that it's something that you would be comfortable with. I also read recently that there are roughly 15 companies out there that have certified Radon folks who can do this testing. So, I know initially we had heard from people that were concerned that this was work that just couldn't be done, but there are 15 companies out there that are ready to move on this. So I feel encouraged by that as well. Committee, any questions?
If I could just respond to that, are you, if it's included here, is it still to be contemplated to be used ESSER funds to pay for this?
For the test itself?
Yes.
So yeah, so the test itself, we received estimates of anywhere between $200 and maybe upwards to as many as $5,000. We don't know where districts necessarily, how they'll use these dollars. In other words, ESSER dollars, are there, number one, is there a way for somebody to say, all right, well, we've been working on this, we've been talking about doing this for a long time, now we have ESSER dollars to do it, and it qualifies, which might free up some money. But given the really the small amount of money that we're talking about compared to, again, notifying, the importance of notifying people around the health issues, we think it's warranted. And if school districts perhaps have issues with the cost, then in terms of remediation, we're also hearing that there's a range. In other words, it could be as little as, we're continuing to work with HVAC systems, making certain that air quality is better. It can have something to do with general ventilation and windows, or it can be more complex. We recognize that this can be more complex, but I worry greatly more and more, having been on this committee, that we're not sending the best message to families, but also to teachers. We're facing a teacher shortage. There seem to be questions around, we know around pensions. And now for us to say that we can't spend these dollars just to notify teachers that whether or not they're walking into the healthiest building possible, I do worry that this overall is going to have an impact on recruitment. So that's where I'm at.
I was just asking, is it ESSER or you're or not? I mean, basically, it sounds like you think it's a small enough cost that it would need attachment to an ESSER appropriation, or?
Yeah, like you said, the Agency of Education is ambiguous on it, so I can't.
Yeah, so that would be, my one concern, and my second concern would be how, to what extent school districts see this as fitting in with the everything else on the table at the moment. And
sure.
I'm not sure to what extent you've taken testimony on this in that regard, but if school districts think it can be done, then I certainly would support that. I am concerned about them having a lot on their plates, as I always am.
Right. So let's talk about that just in relation to the context with the school construction bill, because they are gearing up. They're making lists. They're understanding their the buildings themselves. So it seems like a good spot from where I'm sitting to put this one thing in there. You know,
I
does
would-
that make sense?
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
similar again to my reaction to the lead in the drinking water. Having
Uh-huh.
sort of gone in, I'll say, as a new superintendent and started blank with the facility in many cases, you start with the envelope of the building and the safety and health considerations first. You know, it's just sort of common sense and trying to get
Sure.
a handle on things. I would let this emerge as a prioritization process, not to sort of proclaim this is a priority first. It was my same criticism, if you will, of the lead in drinking water. There's a lot of concerns in our facilities. If this is such a significant concern, then it should obviously emerge from a prioritization needs assessment that's done in facilities. You know, and to what extent are districts already doing this or not? You know, it's an open question, I assume. So I would defer to them in terms of doing that needs assessment and not proclaim this as an absolute priority for them, but certainly it would no doubt emerge if it was.
Thank you. Senator Chittenden.
So Secretary French, thank you for being here and discussing this important topic. I guess what I want to pick apart from what the chair was just commenting on is it seems to me that this radon test would help with what you were just describing, that prioritization process, that collecting the data from these on a granular single school basis, I would say is relatively inexpensive. Those results would help inform that prioritization. Would you disagree with that perspective?
No, not at all. I think it would be part and parcel of an overall, particularly with ESSER funds, it could be considered as part of an indoor air quality evaluation and so forth. But again, it's often, let's say, an initiative can be viewed as another add-on in terms of compliance and so forth for school districts. So I just want to be sure that they're comfortable, or let's say whether they're comfortable or not, they're whether they think they can implement it well in the context of everything else we're asking them to do. It's you know, as the the chair said, it's not appears not to be a significant cost issue. But it can be a significant compliance issue if one fails to comply with the issues and then expose the district to liability. So just want to make sure it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. There's other compliance issues. I'll use asbestos as an example, where districts are required to do biannual inspections of their asbestos containing materials, maintain an asbestos management plan, and so forth when they're doing that remediation. It's not so much the work around asbestos management that's expensive now. It's about complying with those regulatory requirements. So anyway.
I do also, and I know I said it earlier in one of my other responses, I do worry about the liability that we're facing by not notifying, of course, families and teachers and staff. Senators, committee, other questions at this point? Comments or discussion? Secretary French. Oh yeah, please, Senator Chittenden.
So I don't want to belabor the point, but I heard Secretary French in that follow-up remark mention the concern about liability that we might incur after doing the testing and realizing that there are concerns. What was brought up previously and is high in my mind in supporting this is that I feel like that liability exists regardless of whether or not we do this testing. If there is in fact unsafe environments, then I feel like we have to measure that so that we can then react to it and do what is the right course of action and remediate. I feel like by not testing for it, we are just as liable as if we are testing, as we test for it and realize that there's a problem and then fail to act in a fast enough time period. So for me, there's a moral argument that the chair started with, that we should be testing for this and this is the right time to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to defend the moral argument perspective. The better part of our work is morally driven. So you know, we work with children every single day. There's inherent liability to that, but we have to embrace that as we work through those issues. But you know, once again, it's the nature of operating schools. My concerns would be twofold. Again, if you're planning on using ESSER funds or not, and then secondly, to what extent school districts would see this as another initiative in the context of a significant recovery planning process.
Committee, anything else even broadly on S115, Mr. Secretary? Senator Hooker, please.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Secretary French. So I guess I need a clarification. We were thinking that ESSER funds would pay for this, and are we not now? You keep asking, Secretary.
Yeah, it's not
French.
clear to me. I think you know, to be clear in the language, which I've only seen in H426. The language I saw 426 this morning, it isn't clear enough from my perspective to satisfy the use of ESSER. It doesn't make a connection to COVID-19, and that's sort of a requirement. I would suggest there's probably a way to do that, since the indoor air quality is a piece of testing for radon. And there's definitely an impetus behind ESSER to address safety and health considerations in buildings. But the language that I saw this morning is, I would argue, inadequate to satisfy that requirement. I would feel better if it was more strongly associated with the specific requirements of ESSER.
Okay, so we can do that in our crafting of the language. Senator Campion, I don't know, what needs to be done in order to make that
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we can have a committee discussion about that. I mean, right now, we're talking about, we don't want to put the secretary in a position where, as he's mentioned to some of us, the buck, I think, stops with him in terms of justifying how certain things are spent. So this could end up being, we're telling school districts, hey, you have to spend $200 up to $5,000 probably to do this work, and notify people if they have what the level of radon is in the school. After that question, then the question is, what do you do when you know? And again, those range, that can be a range of answers out there, from HVAC to, better air circulation to perhaps a major infrastructure reworking. But given what the federal government is likely to be sending us in terms of infrastructure dollars, and given, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that we know inflation is likely to be coming, let's get moving on this. Let's have our ducks in a row so that we know how we're going to spend any additional federal funds on it.
Yeah, and if you were to leave it up to them to figure out how to cover the cost, you basically would say, this is going to be a requirement. We know you have ESSER funds available to you. We know you have other revenue sources to pay for this. Feel free to try to justify this through ESSER. It's probably going to be doable. But what I was speaking more directly to is the use of the ESSER state set-aside funds, which, that becomes more of I think, mechanically more difficult to achieve.
And just so you're clear, Mr. Secretary, and perhaps I'm misspeaking for the committee, but I wasn't thinking ESSER set aside funds for this at any point. It just didn't, it seemed, so that just wasn't, I was thinking more, if you're a school district and you do have dollars now, and are there ways to say, without in any way being manipulative or anything, but gosh, we've been meaning to, this has been on our list. Now these ESSER dollars that we have at our school could pay for this, possibly freeing up other monies in the budget that could take care of some things that ESSER wouldn't qualify for. That's the way I was thinking about possible some, even for testing. I don't know, in terms of maybe for some of the reworking that schools would have to do to remediate a situation. And then, as I mentioned, I'm thinking the big dollars likely would be coming from the feds in a bigger infrastructure bill. So that's what I was thinking. So, but I wasn't thinking ESSER set aside for this.
So just so I'm clear with Senator Hooker, so it sounds like you would be, and we're happy to work with you on this language. If it was separate language you were bringing forward, possibly in the miscellaneous ed bill, you wouldn't specify, the funding source of it necessarily. You would just require districts to test for radon and to remediate the issue. And then you would acknowledge that they have revenue sources available for them to pay for that. You basically requiring them to test for radon, and it's a condition of safe operation of their buildings.
Exactly.
Okay.
Great. Senator Hooker, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I'm just thinking, with regard to the set aside, I mean, this would be a statewide thing, and in the interest of equity, maybe the set aside wouldn't be such a bad idea. But as long as the schools have the money, and we're seeing all kinds of information saying the schools need direction on how to. Some of these schools will need direction on how to spend their money. This would be a good cause for them to put some dollars behind.
Yeah, and we're advocating for funding to allow us to give them some direction and help coordinate for those particularly that need that. But I think not to get into the broader debate about the set aside, but I also, you got to, I think about the set aside as being only 10% of a larger pot of, funding. So the districts
Yeah.
have 90% of the funding. And in particular, I think of the set aside for being issues that transcend individual district boundaries. So you think of regional issues in particular. And I think when we look at the interim final rule, also a prioritization on state funding going to those districts, students, and so forth that are have been most harmed, that are most vulnerable, that have been most harmed by the pandemic. So we have to think of the state funds as being more strategic in terms of, I think, addressing regional issues or addressing concerns that have impacted our most vulnerable students, and not just trying to stand up a program statewide. Because I think, if we suggest that it is an essential health prerequisite, if you will, of operating a school, then that should be part and parcel of the school district operation costs. And I'm trying to make sort of fit into Senator Campion's argument, then this also is perhaps a unique time to try to do so, because there are other revenue sources available that could be brought to bear, perhaps.
Anything else? Mr. Secretary, anything else from you on S-115 overall? We've heard from your team. I think I'm not
I would just
seeing any red flags.
No, I mean, on a just sort of positive note, I was just on a substance misuse prevention council meeting. I'm on on that council and on the executive group of that council. And just to call out the wellness, section 10, the wellness policy work. I think it's from the agency's perspective to pick up on sort of the ESSER plan and the recovery work that's in front of us. One of our goals, and I think it's emerged pretty early in our response, is to, after this is all done and over, we want to see a better integration of social service and education service delivery models in the landscape. And we want to see that enacted in all regions of the state, not just in some and others. So structures that we can leverage, like wellness policy that's involves education, and also where and our group has a seat on the other side in the Agency of Human Services as well, only can help us bring these things together in terms of really making sure that we're making a difference and coordinating state resources as best as we can. So I think that's for us a priority and a goal through all of this recovery work, is that integration. So I was pleased to see that emphasis on wellness. I think my experience on the receiving end of that initiative, when it came out originally some over 10 years ago, if not longer, it was a bifurcated issue, because the U.S. Department of Agriculture was promoting a separate wellness initiative under the school meals program, and Education Department was promoting a separate wellness. So we had two competing wellness initiatives at the same time. And it was challenging from the field's perspective to pull that together. And it is a mandatory policy requirement currently for school boards to have a wellness policy. It can be a significant lever to handle new issues as they emerge, because any of these policy issues are never really settled. And although we might have enacted this 15 years ago or whatever to think about nutrition as being essential to education, there's always new issues that emerge under the broad definition of wellness. So I think it's a really important tool for school boards to leverage. And I just appreciate seeing that coordination at the state level. I think that's really going to help us bring some things together. We were talking today in our group about the tobacco grants, and how they had been, viewed as a siloed program, again, sort of like the standalone program concept. at one point, tobacco had a home in AHS or in the health department, and now it's administered by the Agency of Education. And to start bringing these programs more together, sort of thinking more comprehensively or coherently about wellness and health issues for our students, I think would be really appreciated in a wise policy approach.
Thank you for that. Thank you as well, Mr. Secretary. We concurred before you were on with House's changes to S16. You and your team were very helpful with that bill. And as you know, we've concurred with S114. Again, your support and guidance on that was very helpful. So thank you for both of those.
Well, nice to see you all again.
Great, thanks. Okay. Committee, Ms. Baker. Thanks for joining Senate Education. We are, as you know, looking at language that you might be particularly interested in as it relates to e-financing. So anything, the floor is yours if you would like to weigh in.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Michelle Baker. I'm the president-elect of the Vermont School Business Officials Association, as well as the Director of Finance for the past 13 years for Harwood Unified Union School District. And we are a current implementer of e-finance as of July. I'm presenting the position of VASBO. VASBO supports a pause in the process of expanding e-finance to new users, as suggested by CFO Bill Bates. We think that this is the best way to allow the agency to fully review the project status and develop a path forward that will assure success. The House bill S115 as passed does allow for that 6-month pause. VASBO also believes that the Agency of Education should continue to provide full support to existing e-finance users. That was a little ambiguous when this was previously H91, I believe, but now as it's transitioned over into S115, that clarity in regards to providing support to the existing users has been explicitly stated, so we do appreciate that. VASBO also supports the implementation of the Uniform Chart of Accounts that Sean discussed, but we do believe that the utilization of e-finance should be voluntary. So that's the one VASBO position that right now, the way S115 is crafted, it does not allow, it's mandatory. There's no change in that mandatory requirement from previous legislation. So we are required to use it. I think Sean did allude to this a bit, but speaking from my own personal experience, we're a district that heavily leveraged technology, and we used a product that had offered far more efficiencies, and the implementation of e-finance for us is definitely going backwards and has resulted in additional costs, additional staff time. So I do agree, some districts are coming from 30-year-old systems. So when they move into this system, there are lots of new bells and whistles and things that they didn't have. Other districts, their boards have supported, and they've been using pretty sophisticated technology and systems, and the move to this system, which frankly, when we first started moving to it, was not fully developed as they had sold it, just has resulted in a lot of additional time and costs in the field. So that's the reason why VASBO really wants it to be voluntary as opposed to mandated. That's really all I had to share.
Yeah, no, thank you. Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Ms. Baker, can the Uniform Chart of Accounts be implemented without switching to e-finance? I assume the answer is yes. Okay.
Yes. So, I mean, most systems, you can set it up. You can set your chart of accounts in any way. So that is, and in fact, I think for those users who are not have not yet implemented e-finance, I believe they are required to utilize the Uniform Chart of Accounts.
Okay, and maybe I should ask Mr. Cousineau this, but do you know how many schools have yet to switch over to e-finance? Or roughly like a percentage, or is it still a lot, or is it just a few?
Mr. Cousineau is still with us if he wants to take that.
Sure, happy to. Yeah, so we have, according to my numbers, 30 more supervisory unions to implement e-finance and the 3 independent tech centers, so 33.
That's sorry, Chair.
Yeah, please, Senator Shitten.
That's how many are left to transfer. How many have already migrated?
Yep. We have 19 live on the system, and then we have 2 that will go live July 1.
Okay. Senator Perchel.
And Ms. Baker, when did Hardwood switch over?
Harwood switched over in July of 2020. We were the 5th group to move over into the system. And I will say, I do give a lot of credit to the AOE. As of late, there have been a lot of work done to improve the system, but the fact is that there's still, the system is still subpar, and certainly doesn't measure up to some of the other systems that are out there. And I think the 6-month pause, one of the reasons for that is to allow them to continue to catch up.
Right. Which is basically what we did last year. I think or the year before, we extended it another year to give the company more time to respond to the criticism of the groups that went first, which I think unfortunately, we learned a lot from those early adopters. So it's been tougher on them. The people that do it later are going to have an easier time. Not really fair to those people that went first, but it's the way it is. All right. Well, thank you.
Senator Shindon.
So just this reminds me of University of Vermont when we switched over to PeopleSoft about 15 years ago. It was a painful process, and a lot of the things I'm hearing really resonate with that experience. And so I know how frustrating, to Senator Perchlik's point, it can be to be one of the leading institutions to pave the way, so to speak. But I will say now PeopleSoft's in place, and people just accept it, and it actually works pretty well. And it's never going to be perfect because there's always going to be a competing platform. But does Mr. Cousineau want to speak to the point about the mandatory aspect of this at all? I don't recall hearing testimony regarding the piece that Michelle raised about the one change she would propose for us to consider to this version of S115.
Sure. Yeah, of course. We have a couple of things that are already built in place that, if the whole state doesn't switch to e-nets, we kind of lose that. It's the data warehouse, being able to pull everyone's data. And I don't believe I mentioned it, but there is also a tool that's been built, and we're probably halfway into implementing it, where we can centrally manage the chart of accounts and create business rules that allow or not allow combinations of the chart. So, there's less adjustments needed, when they report data to us, because they'll be, the accounts they create will follow our business rules. And when there's new codes to be set up or deleted, once a year we can push new codes into their databases or inactivate some, so that when budgets are rolled over, they wouldn't be available for them anymore. So those are 2 big features that won't be fully utilized if we don't keep it mandatory. And then another big piece is paying for 2 systems. I shared what the final maintenance costs will be per our contract, less than 800,000 for the entire state. If we make it, if it wasn't mandatory, then we'll be paying some portion of that 800,000, but then the districts who are on it will continue to pay for their own systems, and at a, from what we see, a higher rate depending on the system they have.
Senator C.
See, I like that. So one quick follow-up to Michelle's point. I hear you where you want to have that flexibility. I already struggle with constituents that struggle with understanding how schools are financed in this great state of Vermont, and I am more persuaded that we need some consistency, and I've seen the benefits of having the same platform. So I'm less inclined to drop that mandatory aspect, but I'd certainly be happy to revisit that next year. Just as one person on this committee, I see the merit of getting us all on the same platform for what Mr. Kuzma was just articulating there. But I don't want to do it forcefully. I don't want people kicking and screaming. I think we need to have this well-paced, and this pause makes a lot of sense to work through the kinks that a lot of people are struggling with.
If I could respond, even out in the field, I think having comparative apples to apples financial information that we can compare ourselves to other similar districts would be very useful. I think where we're at right now with the product, the features that Sean mentioned aren't quite available. So we have additional expenses and time in the district, and we're not yet seeing that offset of the savings associated with, them being able to pull these certain things and manage, because it just isn't that far developed yet. So I think, we're in that painful process that you experienced. And so for some districts like myself, I would argue that it's more expensive where we're at. Obviously if we're successful, that will be improved going forward, but we're just in that tough place of implementation, along with a lot of other districts.
Okay. Anything else for Ms. Baker or Mr. Cousineau while he's here? Okay. Ms. Baker, thanks very much for being with us. Really appreciate you jumping in, and we may be back in touch as we make our way through this bill.
Thank you. We appreciate being able to testify as FASBO. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Mr. Cousineau, thank you as well. Appreciate you coming in and sharing your expertise, you and Mr. Bates. And again, if we have additional questions regarding these sections, we'll certainly let you know.
Thank you. Be happy to come back.
Great. Thank you.
All
right. Let's see. Mr. Carroll.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good, good. Life's treating you okay?
So far, so good. Yeah.
Good, good. Glad to hear it. Grateful for your time today. We're talking about the sections in this miscellaneous education bill that have to do with getting to a good spot around between you and the Agency of Education. This is something I know that's been important to you, which I appreciate. I'm wondering if you would just tell the committee a little bit about your thoughts on this and what your hopes are for this section.
Well, my sense about it, as I shared with House Ed, is that it's a good way forward. The origins of this, I think it's fair to say, arose from S-166, which was last year's Senate Education Committee's bill to, quote, reform the State Board of Education. And more precisely, it was to reallocate responsibilities between the Agency of Education and the State Board. And in general, it was about moving a number of kind of administrative activities of the State Board and placing them where they truly belong, which is in the agency. And so this committee last year did a lot of really good work on that. It was a 58-page bill with a lot of complexity. But even when it was unanimously approved in the state Senate last year, it nonetheless, it turns out, the agency was not happy with many elements of it. and made that clear to people this year. And so the House was, I think the chair would have said, wasn't ready to take on sorting all those differences out. And I understand the limits to the legislative process and the committee process. I mean, when you've got two constituencies who are really not seeing eye to eye about some fundamental things, that's kind of messy business. And so it was, instead of leaving it to the legislature to sort out these differences, it essentially has been bounced back to the players, that is to the state board and to the agency, to get these differences sorted out offline, if you will, and then come back next year to you all in both chambers with hopefully a resolution of our differences. I think it's fair to say that the Secretary of Education has a different vision for what the state board should be than the state board does. I mean, in point of fact, he's actually written that he thinks the board should be abolished. And we on the state board don't concur, as you might imagine. So we have these differences to sort out, and I think this mechanism that in section 15, I guess it is. No, I have the section wrong. Section 18, pardon me, would be a good way to move forward. We will work, in effect, offline until the end of this year. And then the end of this year, together we'll come back to the General Assembly with hopefully a single vision. There may be some pieces where there's difference, but hopefully we can narrow those down to a very small parts and make for a more workable piece of legislative challenge going forward. I've already put the state board on notice that I will be appointing a couple of working groups to begin addressing the kind of criteria that are set forth here in section 18, the 1, 2, 3, 4 objectives that the House had in mind. I think we need to take a look at those from the perspective of the state board. How well are we doing on each of these? I can say, kind of as if in confession, that I think we are not doing very well with rulemaking. I think we're always behind schedule on rulemaking. There are 300 to 500 pages of rules. It's a little bit like Vermont statutes annotated. It's fairly daunting, and we tend to update the rules when there's a squeaky wheel demanding that it gets our attention. So, for example, we spent the last 18 months working on the rules for special education mandated by Act 173 and the census-based funding reform. And we've just finally gotten those through the process. Just last week, Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules signed off on the new 132360 rules that will govern special education reform. It was a massive undertaking with a lot of people contributing. So we need to get better at rulemaking, that's for sure. And then several other things. So one sentence, completely support this element, section 18 in 115.
Mr. Carroll, as you're speaking, I do worry that we're not supporting all of you as much as we need to be. And so as you're thinking about if there are things that you're might need from us this summer, you all are you do take on an awful lot, and I appreciate, but I'm worried that you don't have adequate support to do all of that work. So please know that we're happy to be as helpful as we possibly can be. We're honored to meet your new board members and have them in for a little interview. Terrific people. Some probably better than others. Some have been in their positions and very excited about that. But when you just mention all the work you're going to be doing this summer and that you just finished up the rules on 173, I'm reminded how much you're all taking on. So thank you, and please let us know how we can be most helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question of staff support is one that's been kind of hanging out there since the year 2012, and it's not going away. And so at some point, I think I'm hopeful that the legislature might bite the bullet and provide for some staff support. The board's budget is about $70,000 a year. And so you can see that doesn't go terribly far. We have no staff. I'm very quick to say, though, that there are many agency employees who do provide staff support for us.
Sure.
And many of them do a really wonderful job. But then there are other places where the agency has a point of view that's different than the board's, and so the agency's staff can't be really relied upon for support in such instances. And rules are a good example of that. Board sees the rules through a different lens. We see it through the community's lens, whereas the agency sees it through Montpelier's lens. Those are very different, and it's our job to represent the communities and the decentralized component of education that we've spoken about together. And so there are times when the agency can't share that perspective and doesn't, and their staff people don't. And we have to turn to others for that. And you'll know, for example, I'm sure you all know Megan Roy in the advisory committee on census-based funding, which did such a good job pulling together the perspective as seen from the schools and the community's point of view. And that sometimes was in flagrant differential from the way it's seen by the agency. So yeah, the resource issue is a challenge.
Be good to connect with you sometime this summer also, and just have that conversation a little bit more and see if, and maybe it might even come up a little bit with your conversations with Secretary French.
Yes, in fact, that's one of the criteria that we are to consider is the question of qualified and properly trained staff. Mr. Chairman, may I inquire of you about the status of the language excerpted from 166 that the Senate Committee on Gov Ops had asked about?
Yes, thanks for the question. That and our language diversifying the state board, I suspect this bill will be the vehicle back to the House. That seems to make the most sense to me. I haven't discussed that yet with my colleagues, but it seems those are two little changes important changes that need to finish. They're right now kind of out there. We have H101, which is a vehicle that we could send them back on, but we may need that for other things.
Well, they certainly fit well here, miscellaneous education. Thank you. I'm hoping earnestly that you'll be able to keep those moving forward. Thank you.
And I think the House is excited to, they're in support of those things. So I think that sounds good. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Anything else for Mr. Carroll? Great. Great to be with you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much.
Ms. Garces.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. Amanda, I'm sorry to ask this. Am I pronouncing your name properly?
Garces.
Garces. Okay.
As an accent on the E.
Okay.
Garces.
Great. Thank you for that. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we're thrilled to have you. Thank you for reaching out to us to come in and talk about the language that is now in S115, which you proposed and you advocated for. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Amanda Garces, and I am the Director of Policy, Education and Outreach for the Vermont Human Rights Commission and the Chair of the Act One Working Group. So we're very pleased with this language. This basically does three things, as Emily Sims from the AOE explained. It gives us 3 more members, which we have been advocating for. This will include 2 students and Indigenous person. We are at a turning point in our work where we need more support to be able to really look at the educational standards. We'd spent quite a lot of time looking at the education quality standards this year, which we're finalizing this in the next few months. But the rest is work that we do need some expert support. So this language just basically says that the Agency of Education will give us administrative support, which we have been advocating for, technical and legal support, and in addition to, will help us look at whether or not they have the expertise and the people that we need to help us look at the standards. And if they don't, then there will be an RFP for $50,000 to try to contract out some of these expertise that we need. So we'll first, kind of together look with the Agency of Education team. This also extends our date. We have a June 30th report, which we are now able to meet because we haven't had the resources needed to make that report. So we're moving that to December of 2021. This work began 5 months later than was supposed to. So we're basically behind those 6 months that we need at the beginning of the time. And so, yeah, we're excited about this language, to have the support. It's not all that we wanted, but this is a beginning for something tangible that we can do as a team. So we thank you, and we hope that you can support this part.
Great. Well, no, we thank you for advancing this and for coming in and talking with us today. Committee, questions or comments for Ms. Garces? I think you're seeing a room of people who are in agreement with you. So
great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Look forward to continuing our work together.
Great, thank you so much, and
Great, thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Committee, that looks like it concludes our work for the day. I will bring those 2 little state board things to the committee tomorrow for everyone's consideration on S115. Also wondering if there's anyone that anybody else would like to hear from on S115. So we would concur with further proposal of amendment, which I will check with Chair Webb, but I believe it's safe to say they are comfortable with the 2 state board changes that we've worked on a while back. And I'll have Jim review all of those for us tomorrow if he's back with us. And if not, we'll have Jen Carvey. So, and I think my plan with Chair Webb would be that they would then concur with us, and we would be done with that bill. Any questions, concerns? Jeannie, do you want to take us off? I think we're just about ready.